Turnkey with Morgan Francis, sponsored by Integrity Roofing.
Welcome into Turnkey on Queen City News Plus, your go-to show for everything real estate in the Carolinas. We talk about the latest market trends, do's and don'ts of the industry, and provide expert advice on navigating this dynamic landscape that we call home. When you're shopping for a home, what do you go with? Something new or something older? Well, today we have Charlie Williams on the show to talk about specifically historic homes, which is what you kind of specialize in, right, Charlie?
It is, yeah. So I've been doing real estate now for 14 years and just over the years have been able to kind of build out a niche in historic homes.
So you don't just sell historic, right? Because that would be almost like too niche, right?
Yeah, exactly. There wouldn't be enough of them to make a good living.
Yeah.
Because they don't come on the market as often as resale homes do.
So how did you get involved in selling historic homes? Are you a fan yourself?
I am a fan. So my wife and I bought a 1890 Fort Victorian in downtown Concord.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife grew up in a historic 1700s farmhouse. And so I've always enjoyed historic homes and being around them. And then buying that house really kind of catapulted me into becoming more of a specialist in that world.
We're going to pull up one of the homes that you listed. This is the oldest one that you've ever sold, right?
Yeah, the oldest one, built in 1844 in Lincolnton.
It's so interesting because the homes that you sell, predate all of us. So how do you go about doing your research to be able to come up with an appropriate price for a home like this?
Yeah, it depends. So you basically can just look at the recent comps, so what's sold in the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
That way it gives you a baseline of what is the market for that area. And then specifically dive into, are there any other historic homes that have sold? And if so, then that'll give you a better baseline. But if not, then you need to go outside the area. So if that's Lincolnton, you might want to go to Gastonia or Belmont or something close by. If it's outside in Concord, then maybe you look in Kannapolis or Salisbury. But you need to go outside and find another house that can give you a rough idea of what it's worth.
Are the floors in this home, do you remember? Where is this, by the way? This is Laboratory Road.
Yeah, so it's over in Lincolnton, so near downtown, and there's an old mill down the street where they have wedding venues. All the floors in there, original hardwoods, original trim, details, everything. They did a really good job to preserve that one.
Do you ever walk into a home that someone says, hey, I have, you're the guy, I've got a historic home that I'm looking to sell, and you walk into it and see that they have made the wrong decisions when they go to renovate? Because I think, it really, you got to be cautious with something like that, is upgrading it so that people enjoy it, but not taking away some of the things that make it so charming.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, especially when you're trying to appeal to a historic home buyer. They want all the details. They want the unlevel floors. They want all the.
They want the unlevel floors.
They want the unlevel floors. They want to feel it.
Floors.
Yeah, no, they want it all.
Okay.
So if you completely strip a historic house of all the details, then the buyer's not going to be as excited about it because they want all the nuances with it.
And I saw in the kitchen, for instance, they had butcher block instead of like a granite or quartz countertop. So it seems like what they chose was very intentional. And look at these stairs. I mean, how many is 2 to 3 levels to this house?
4 technically.
4. Okay.
Yeah, if you count the basement. There's a little upstairs area.
Your workout in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a little upstairs area you can go to. And for that one with the countertops, they actually had some laminate countertops in there. So before we listed it, we recommended, hey, switch it out to the butcher block.
Okay.
So we do things like that as well, which I think helps.
Butcher block is interesting because it's appealing. It looks great and it's affordable too. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't hit your wallet to replace countertops with butcher block because it is a more affordable material to use.
Definitely, and it looks really pretty too. And it also adds some character and charm. And then you're going to scuff it and add marks through on it, so you're going to create some character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with having those.
So on that point of character, right? I would assume a lot of these homes come with a story.
Mm-hmm.
So is that part of your research, is finding out not just about the home, but the home's story and who lived there and what their background was? Is that part of your research?
Yeah, definitely, because people do want to know the history of the house and what has it been through and who built it and how did it get here. So sometimes there's no story to tell, and it's changed hands, and somebody bought it 2 years ago, so there's
Yeah.
no family story. But other homes, you know, they built them in 1900, and it stayed in the family that whole time. So those are the ones that have the stories that you can tell, and really an opportunity for a buyer to get in on a house where it hasn't been for sale in 100, 200 years.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite story that comes to mind of someone who owned a house and just researching it, you found out something about the family who lived there that was interesting?
I mean, mainly here in our area, it's all, for the most part, like the bigger homes in Belmont, Concord, are all textiles. So
Mhm.
most of them, um, like for example, the Lineberger house in Belmont, that was built in early 1900 by the Lineberger family, and they were in Gastonia. Their mills were there.
Different house than the one we're looking at,
Yeah,
right?
different
Okay.
house. Yeah. So this one's laboratory.
Yeah. Okay.
But the Belmont one, that family, they moved from Gastonia over to Belmont, and basically founded Belmont
Mhm.
and built the mill there. So there's multiple Lineberger homes still in Belmont. But that was one of the ones that we've sold.
So, what makes a historic home so special? As we pull up another one that is, I believe this one, it was transformed into a wedding venue, right?
Yeah, that's Ritchie Hill in downtown Concord,
And that was built in 18.
1897.
Wow.
So that
Impressive.
that one was in the family until we sold it a couple years ago now.
So,
That was the
so,
first time it transferred.
so, what makes a historic home stand out versus a new build?
Um, I think mainly like when you go into a historic home, it has a soul to it where you can, I don't know, you just feel different than when you go to a newer build house that's nice and clean. So I think historic homes just have built-in stories that you can feel when you go into them.
Mm-hmm. You yourself have a historic home or had
Yes,
one, right?
had. Yeah, we just
Yeah.
sold it. Bittersweet. But definitely we'll be buying another one as time goes on. Just because my wife loves them and I love them as well. But yeah, they're the best part about it, I think, is whenever you fix it up, renovate it, add something to it, you're kind of adding another chapter to the book of
Mm-hmm.
that house. So
Mm-hmm.
that's I think the fun part of it.
You can feel the warmth. I
Yeah,
feel like
warmth.
more
Yeah,
with a home that has, such a rich history
exactly.
than a new build. You walk in and nothing against a new
No,
build, right? This is just
love it too.
for people who are passionate about a historic home.
Yeah.
It's the story that I think, do you have clients who want to know the story more than what are the floors made of? Do you get more questions about that?
Yeah, I mean a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean people are still concerned. Probably the biggest concern is how old's the roof, how old's the HVAC,
What's it going to cost me?
what's it going to cost me to maintain this?
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's number one concern. But then number two would be what's the backstory of it?
Right.
Is there any negative history that happened in the house? Are there ghosts? We don't have to legally disclose that in North Carolina.
We had a
Other
whole
states you do.
Halloween episode
Okay,
about
cool.
that and what needed to be disclosed.
Yeah.
But some people, they want the ghost. They're
Exactly. You want
passionate
some
about
friends.
that. So yeah, some friends. But yeah, have you ever run into that where the sellers are like, "Hey, there's a ghost," and you're like, "Yeah."
Luckily, no. So I haven't had
Good.
to go down that dance or anything
Yeah.
crazy that I know of. I mean, I guess they probably wouldn't tell me that, maybe.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably
'Cause,
not.
they want to get the highest dollar possible.
So we touched on this just a little bit, but how much is this going to cost me, right? Do people who are shopping for these homes, what do they need to keep in mind in terms of how much to budget? And I know that's kind of like dependent on the house, right? But
Yeah, definitely.
should you expect that things are going to break easier? Or do you, in your experience, find that the materials are that they're better made, right? You have hardwood floors that maybe are more durable. What do you find in your experience in terms of how much someone is going to put into a house to maintain it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's a big variable that you don't really know until you get in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I always laugh. My former coworker Jay, he lives in a historic house in Monroe.
Okay.
And when I told him, I was like, "Hey, we're gonna buy a historic house in Concord," he just laughed and he goes, "There's always something to do."
Well, that's with any house.
Exactly. So I think that sums it up pretty well. But
Mm.
with the historic house, I mean, you're getting really good building materials. You're getting solid construction. So if you're able to get one with a newer roof, updated electrical, updated plumbing, updated HVAC, then you're buying a tank, with
Mhm.
a brand new house kind of built in. So that's kind of the perfect scenario if you can find that.
We discussed this offline, but I want to touch upon it since we're on the show and everything. You mentioned something about if God forbid there was a fire,
Yeah.
that there's actually, evidence that a historic home would maybe be better in a situation like that than a newer build. Can you kind of explain that to me?
Yes, after we chatted about that, I looked up the statistics just to confirm that. And a newer built house can be fully engulfed in flames within 5 minutes
Wow.
versus a historic house. At a minimum, you're at 15 minutes, but 30 minutes or more. That's just because the wood, it's thicker. So if you cut like a floor joist in a historic home, the rings are going to be really tight together. That means the tree's older.
Hmm.
So the wood's thicker and more dense versus wood now may only be a couple years old, like 7 or 8 years old. The rings are really wide apart. So you have that along with like plaster walls, which is a lot thicker, real wood floors versus synthetic. So yeah, it takes a lot longer for a historic house.
Well, I would think too the way that, for instance, LVP, luxury vinyl plank, is built. There are more, you know, there are more materials involved in that could be flammable.
Yeah.
I would think, and that not picking on that particular type of flooring, but just the materials that we use nowadays. It's not like a solid piece of wood that
Yep.
would take a while to burn.
I mean, the counter argument to that would be, at least with a newer house, you're going to have smoke detectors in each room versus a historic house, they didn't have smoke detectors.
So does
So,
does insurance look differently? And I know you're not an insurance agent. I'm not asking you
full
to.
disclaimer,
Yeah, right. And
whatever
you're
I
not
say
an
here,
attorney.
no,
So,
yeah, exactly.
but
Yeah.
but does insurance look differently with covering a historic home?
Some carriers, yes. So there are insurance carriers that are better than others for historic homes. And then you also need to check and see if it has knob and tube wiring. Some insurance carriers, actually most, will not insure a house that has knob and tube wiring.
Okay.
Uh,
What are some other materials to that point that that you would find in like cast iron pipes? I would think
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
would find in
yeah.
older homes that just are non-existent in homes now.
Yeah, I mean, cast iron would be a good one, and basically they just rust from the inside out. So you'll just start having slow drains and not really realize what's going on, but that's just rust and buildup within the pipes. So those are eventually going to fail over time. But yeah, mainly knob and tube, cast iron, and then like asbestos siding was popular. So you might have some of that as well, which would require specialists to come in to remove that.
Let's take another look at one of the homes that you've sold. This one is on Commonwealth Avenue, and what I love about this one is it doesn't look like the other ones we've shown, right? It's a perfect mix of new and old, and I'm assuming there was a renovation along the way, right?
Definitely.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they past clients of mine, they bought this house from a builder. So this was his personal house.
Mm-hmm.
So he took a lot of time and energy and did it right. Really did a good job of mixing the old with the new and blending in the different styles, especially that kitchen, coolest kitchen that I've sold.
And so they went through and completely renovated this, and it looks like it was done, extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you suggest if someone wants to renovate an older home to appeal to a larger audience? How does someone even go about that? I mean, do you have to really do your due diligence with finding a designer who knows what they're doing with something like that?
Definitely, because not everybody understands what a historic home buyer is looking for and the nuances that they're okay with and not okay with. Versus some people might be, oh, that needs to go. But in reality, that's what gives the house some charm and character. So you wouldn't want to remove that. So I always recommend if it has plaster walls, try to keep the plaster walls there. They're just warmer than drywall. It feels good. And then any of the original trim, keep that there as well. Don't remove that unless you absolutely have to for wood rot or whatever.
I love the arched entryways into various.
Really cool.
You
See
know,
a lot of that now in new construction.
well, and this is not necessarily open concept. Which, how do you balance the way that homes were built, which was more sectionalized, right?
Yep.
With what's trendy, which is open concept.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think historic home buyers are okay with the rooms being more traditional.
Different client.
Yeah, because you're kind of paying homage to how it was back in the day. So I think they're less concerned with that, but more about you have a common space where you can still gather with 20, 30 people and have good conversations. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that the kitchen is open, the living area. It's just you have a grand living area that you can hang out with them with your friends.
And this one, correct me if I'm wrong, went for a little over asking, right?
Yeah, so this is pretty cool story for the sellers. So that, as you can see in the videos there, that they have younger kids. So we listed as coming soon, which means nobody can go in and take a look at it until after you hit the market. We had 8 or 9 showings lined up, but we had one offer come in prior to us going active, and it was for $100,000 over asking with the $100,000 due diligence fee.
Oh wow! So they're not backing out. So so for people who might not understand, when was this?
June of this year.
Okay, so this wasn't even like during the height of when the interest rates were low and everyone was buying a house. This isn't even during that time.
No.
But due diligence is not refunded in North Carolina. So when you're saying I'm going to put down $100,000 in due diligence money, you're not backing out. So for your clients who are selling it, they know that this person's got enough skin in the game that if there's something wrong with the house that comes up during the inspection, they're on the hook for $100,000. So long story short, that's almost a done deal, right? You still got to sign the contract.
Yeah, they were asking me like, well, what's the worst case scenario? I was like, okay, worst case scenario is they go into it after they've given us the $100,000 and they don't like it, and then you made $100,000 and then we sell it to the 8 other people that are waiting to look at it.
Which obviously this one sold. There's no way someone would back out.
So you do get your money back if you close.
Right. The $100K goes toward the price
put
of
down whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. That had to have been just just relief for your clients. It's like great.
No show.
You don't even have to show it.
Exactly. Yeah, because they had to get dogs and kids.
Yeah.
Everything out.
Let's take another look at another property. This one is on Gold Hill Road, and what I loved looking through these pictures, not just an old house. There's also like an older car. Parked right outside. Did the car come with the house?
Good question. So he had a little car club in Concord, and he worked on historic cars. So he and I were just
same color as the house.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. So he and I were just chatting about it. I was like, it'd be kind of cool if we put the car in the shot. So we pulled the car up and added that. That's also his he called that his work truck. So he pulled that into the shots, which I thought added a nice little touch to it.
With your notes that you put, because you provided these videos, obviously, you said that this one was, the records say built in 1918, but there's evidence that it might be older, and I found that very interesting because these homes kind of predate like modern record keeping.
Yep.
So how do you find evidence that it might be older? What does that research look like?
Yeah, so he took me down underneath the house. So we were looking at just how the wood was cut. It was more hand-hewn cut versus, with the bigger saw that you would have done. So the tax record said 1918 was the official date, but just based on that, it could have been mid-1800s for at least that part of the house. I mean, maybe they added on. But little things like that can tell you that maybe it's actually older because you're relying on county records from the early 1900s. So how accurate was that?
Right. And my next question, I assume that you're going to say just repetition, but how do you learn this stuff? How do you look at a piece of wood and say, okay, the way that this appears to be cut. I mean, you're not like a woodworker, right? So how do you build up that knowledge base?
Yeah, the repetition. And I mean, the owner pointed it out to me and said, hey, let's go look at this. And then also my father-in-law, they live in a 1700s farmhouse. So you can actually see.
So it runs in the family a little
exactly.
bit.
So you can actually see on the wood where it was chiseled out, basically. And those are solid trees that they use for the beams. So you can just see as time goes on how different building methods change.
So as we mentioned at the top of the show, you don't just sell historic homes. You sell, everyday homes that were built maybe, within the past year or 5 years or whatever. But how do you kind of balance the time that it takes to research a home like this with, I guess, how do you compare with a normal home that maybe was built within the last 5 years or so? What's that commitment look like?
It depends. I mean, it's really everything's down to price. So a historic house, as long as you're priced right, it should be the same kind of process as a newer built house. But if you overprice it, then you're just going to sit on the market just like you would with a normal house. If the sellers have the stories to tell, then you sit down with them and you're probably hanging out with them a little bit longer than you would. Like, here's my new house.
Tea on the porch.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So yeah, I would say that process is a little bit different, just depending on the seller.
So it would seem that most of these homes aren't in what would be a designated historic district. Am I correct in that assumption?
None of those. Well, the Ritchie Hill, the one on Union Street, was.
Okay.
And then
this one
the Belmont
was in a
one.
historic.
That one
the
right
wedding
there.
venue. Okay.
Yep. So that was in a historic district. One in Belmont was. I just had one in Wilmore, so that was in a historic district as well.
So what do people need to know about historic districts? Because you've got, typically you have an HOA, a lot of HOAs around here, but historic districts are treated differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar in the way that they have guidelines and standards that you have to adhere to, and then any exterior changes that you want to make, you have to go in front of them and present that to them. And they're all different. So the Concord Historic District is different than the Dilworth Historic District, different than Gastonia. They're all different. And it really just depends on who's on the board at that time, on how difficult they're going to make it for you. But
so be nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Be nice to the people
everybody
on the board of the historic district. Be really nice.
Yeah,
homemade cookies.
Exactly, cookie. But I mean, I feel like at the most part, as long as you're using materials that were around back when your house was constructed, then you're going to be fine.
How easy or hard is that?
It just costs more money, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you need more of a specialist that knows what they're doing with wood siding versus vinyl. So it's more just it costs more because there's a lot more details and it took a lot longer to build a house back in the day. So they spent more time on them.
I'm curious what you think of a trend that we're seeing in, what historic neighborhood? I think Wilmore is where we saw this. There's this famous, they call it the Mullet House.
Mullet House, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you're familiar. So they call it the Mullet House. It is historic in the front and then this big, huge addition in the back. And we're seeing a lot of people do that in that neighborhood specifically. Is the homes were maybe 2-bedroom, 1-bath, smaller brick homes, and they're quaint and they're beautiful, but people just need more space now. So they're doing these big additions on the back as a way to kind of balance the requirements from the historic district and or the board, but also get kind of that bigger home that they're looking for. I'm curious, as someone who's really passionate about historic homes, what you think of that trend.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for the smaller homes like that, I'm okay with it. I think it's fine. But a bigger house that's more grand, if you do something modern off the back of it, I'm not necessarily a big fan of that.
Right.
Just keep
something that's just completely different.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I understand why, because 40s historic home like the Mullet House, like just a small normal house on the outside, so that's okay. But yeah, something like Ritchie Hill or the Concord House would be travesty to do a big box off the back of it.
Yeah, you'd almost ruin it, you know?
Exactly.
Charlie, it's been so wonderful having you on. Any final thoughts on the topic?
No, I mean, just if you want to buy a historic home, definitely do your research, check out all the internals, make sure everything's good, and then obviously hire a real estate agent.
Yeah, a good one at
A good
that.
one, correct.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie, and thank you to everyone else who watched this episode of Turnkey on Queen City News Plus. We'll see you next time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.